Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Ches of Masechta Shabbis. Now, friends, if you recall, on Daf Ches of Masechta Brachis, we learned about something called Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. That there's a mitzvah every week to read the parshas of Shavua. You read the Chumash twice, and then you read Targum. One of the acceptable translations is Rashi. Now, today's daf is going to be the real indication for who's been doing Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum with Rashi, and not only that, but who's been doing it well. And specifically, parshas terumah. Parshas terumah is probably one of the most difficult parshas. One of the most difficult parshas to do Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum. Now, I'm thankful that although currently usually I do Shnai Mikra extremely quickly, in years past I've taken the time to do it properly, and therefore Daf Tzadi Ches is more of a review for me, and I somewhat like it actually. However, if this is your first experience with the details of the dimensions of the different parts that together make up the Mishkan in terms of Krushim and Adanim and the different coverings and their sizes and things like that, well, either you can press pause and go learn Parshas Terumah with Rashi, or we can learn it together right now. I will provide all the diagrams and everything that you need, and we can learn it together. Or we can just see what happens. Friends, Daf Tzadi Ches. So we're going to start off with I guess, relatively speaking, I guess we could say, just some easy stuff like throwing stuff from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah with Rosh Hashanah be'emtza. No big deal, right? We can kind of do that in our sleep these days. But then we get involved in the wagons from the Mishkan that they would load up with the beams from the Mishkan and the space in between the beams and things like that. And then towards the end of the daf, we're going to start talking about the different coverings of the Mishkan, how long they were, how wide they were, how they covered the beams, how much of the beams they covered, all sorts of fun stuff. Friends, let's get started. So we're going to start in Daf Tzadi Zayin, Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us, Rishus HaRabbim, Rishus HaRabbim, Rishus HaYachid be'emtza. Oh, somebody throws from one public domain to another public domain. And in the middle, there is a Rishus HaYachid. Okay, fine. Dalet Amos, and now he throws this item 4 Amos. Chayiv. Pachos me'ab Amos Pater. So meaning, if he threw, right, so essentially he threw something from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah. So there's no problem of Hotzah necessarily, right, because it's not 2 different domains. It's one domain, right? Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. However, what about throwing something 4 Amos in Rosh Hashanah? So what we're saying is, if together the amount that he threw was at least 4 Amos, so let's say he threw 2 Amos in Rosh Hashanah, and then it crossed over Rosh Hashanah, and then traveled another 2 Amos in the second Rosh Hashanah, so we're saying it'll be Chayiv. But let's say it only went 1 Amma in the Rosh Hashanah, then passed over the Rosh Hashanah, and then traveled only another Amma, so it's a total of just 2 Amos in Rosh Hashanah, so then you're going to be, then he's going to be Pater, right? So my Kamash Malan, Ha Kamash Malan. So what is this brisa teaching us? It's teaching us the following. Rishiyos mitztarfos, v'lo aminan kluta k'mashu unachos. So it's teaching us 2 things. First thing, it's teaching us that the 2 Rishiyos can join together, right? So that when it went 2 Amos in the first Rosh Hashanah, then 2 Amos in the second Rosh Hashanah, they could join together and create the Dalet Amos that we need in order to require you to bring a korban chatas. And the second thing that it teaches is that when there isn't 4 Amos combined, well then you're pater from a korban chatas. What about the fact that it traveled through Rishus HaYachid? What about kluta k'moshu unachadami? Right? That when it goes into Rishus HaYachid, it should be as though it landed in Rishus HaYachid, and you should be chayav. So it teaches that we don't say kluta k'moshu unacha, and therefore it's not like it landed in Rishus HaYachid, and you're not chayav for otzah, and as long as it's less than 4 Amos in total, you will not be chayav for ha'avara either. Or zorek, I guess. Well, I guess Zorik is really Ha'avar, no? I think. Why not? Friends, let's move on. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. So says Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Abba, who says in the name of Rav Huna, who says in the name of his teacher Rav. Okay, what does he say? Hamayver dal amos b'reshus harabim mekura pater. So if somebody carries something 4 amos in a reshus harabim that has a roof over it, I don't really know necessarily how you have a reshus harabim with a roof over it. I don't know, but somehow you do. Pater. So we say that you are pater. How come? Because it's not similar. It's like what they did in the desert. And therefore, in the desert, they didn't carry in a reshus harabim that had a roof over it. So therefore, meaning there was no such instance, there's no such place where they would do such a thing. And therefore, there's no corresponding melacha on Shabbos regarding carrying something in a reshus harabim that has a roof over it. Carry stuff as much as you want in a reshus harabim that has a roof over it. Okay. Well, no, it doesn't, not as much as you want. It would be pater av alaser. Fine. The Gemara says, Ini, is this really true? Did Rav really say this? Ve'agalos de mikoros havyan. But what about the wagons, right? We've talked about the wagons before, right? That when they would dismantle the Mishkan, there would be 4 wagons that they would load all the beams from the Mishkan onto those wagons, okay? And they were covered, right? You would take the beams and you would stack them up on the wagon, and you would essentially cover the wagon with beams. So now we said, and these wagons were in reshus harabim. So wouldn't this be considered a reshus harabim that has a roof over it? V'amar Rav, and says Rav Mishum Rabbi Chia, in the name of his uncle Rabbi Chia, agalos tachtein uvenein v'tzidein reshus harabim. And what did Rav say? Rav said that the wagons, so beneath the wagons, and between the wagons, and on the sides of the wagons, they are reshus harabim, right? So what does this mean? So beneath that means just that. So if you have the wagons and or at least the assumption right now is that you have the wagons and you take the beams and you lay them off, you would lay them off, so if the wagon was kind of going lengthwise, so you would put the beams not lengthwise but widthwise. It would be kind of perpendicular, right? So we said that, so the wagon was, I believe, was 5 amos long, right? Now these beams were 10 amos tall, right? So you wouldn't put it the lengthwise, you would put it the widthwise, which is actually exactly what we're going to talk about right now. So like you wouldn't put it from the beginning of the 10 amos to I don't know how to even explain this. So there are diagrams. So if you look on the diagram for the page that says 98A2, so you'll kind of see what I mean. On the left side there's that diagram of the beams across the wagon, and you'll see how kind of it's like whatever, the length, the width of the beams across the length of the wagon. I don't really know how to explain it any better than to just say, look at the diagram on 98A2 from the art scroll. Okay, fine. Now, what else? So what were we saying again? So, basically, you would have these wagons, and they would be covered by the beams, okay? And also in between the wagons, so there would be 5 amos in between the wagons, and those 5 amos were actually covered by the beams that were hanging off, right? Because basically how am I even supposed to explain this? Again, if we go, well, I can explain it with the diagrams. That's what I'm going to do. So we gotta both agree. We gotta agree to be looking at these diagrams. So if we look at that same diagram on 98A2, so then you see that the actual wagon was 2.5 amos wide. And then there was like an axle, and then there would be the wheels on the right, and then on the left there would be an axle and the wheels on the left, and together between the wagon and the axles and the wheels, it would be 5 amos wide. And then there would be, but the beams, of course, were 10 amos long, which means that on either side of the wagon, right? So meaning 5 amos worth of the beams would be consumed by the wagon and the wheels, which means that there's an additional 5 amos left on the beam. Now spread out evenly across either side of the wagon would be 2.5 amos left of beam on either side of the wagon. So now, now there were 4 wagons, of course, one in front, one behind, and then you would have the same setup next to it, okay? And in between the 2 pairs of wagons, there would be 5 amos. Now those 5 amos would be completely covered by the overhang of the beams from either set of wagons. Does that make sense? I hope, right? Because there's going to be beam hanging off 2.5 amos from each wagon, which means that together that makes 5. So that is what Beinein means. And then there's also Tzideim is basically you see that there's some space between the actual wagon and the wheels, so that's the Tzidein. And what Rav is saying is that under these elements, under the wagon, under the sides of the wagon and the wheel, and then under the area between the wagons, what does he say? He says Rishus Harabim. It's considered Rishus Harabim. So doesn't it sound like these are Rishus Harabims that have a roof over them? So why would Rav be saying on the one hand that a Rishus Harabim that has a roof over it, you would be patur because we don't have an example, a precedent from the Mishkan, but doesn't Rav also say that under the wagon, the sides of the wagon, and in between the wagons would be Rishus Harabim, and those were covered? No. Rav, what's going on? So the Gemara answers, Ki ka'amar Rav bidar asa. So when Rav says that it's considered Rishus Harabim underneath, in between, and on the sides of the wagons, it is talking about in the spaces between, meaning underneath the wagon, the sides, and in between the wagons, we're not completely covered. There were spaces in between the beams, and it's those spaces in between the beams that would be considered Rishus Harabim, but not the parts that are covered. Now, the Gemara wants to try to understand what exactly are these spaces between the beams, and why would they be considered not covered? Because after all, let's not forget of the principle of lavud, that things that are within 3 tvachim of each other are considered connected. So in order for the space in between the beams to be really considered in between and not covered, there would have to be at least 3 tvachim between the beams. And the question is that really physically possible? So let's see. Michdei, let's see. Orcha da'agala kama havoi chamesh amin. Okay. So the length of the wagon was 5 amos. Again, so let's continue to use this diagram on 98A2 for our understanding. Okay, so the length of the wagon was 5 amos. Okay, fine. Now, pusya de keresh kama havoi amsa ufalga. Okay. Now, what was the length of each one of these beams? Now, we know, of course, that the beams were 10 amos tall. Okay, they were also 1 amma thick, and they were 1.5 amos wide. So if you think about them as like a 3-dimensional rectangle, okay, so its height was 10 amos, okay, its width, i.e., if you imagine them like as part of the wall, so the width of the wall of the Mishkan, the thickness of it, was 1 amma thick, okay, and then the width of each beam, I don't know if I just said width, but like that's kilu, the thickness, and then the length, I guess we would say, of the beam, or we're calling it the width over here. Oh gosh, now I'm already confusing things. Basically, imagine you're looking at the wall of the Mishkan, right? Imagine you have a long wall right in front of you, and this wall is made up of 20 of these beams, okay? So what you'd be looking at is the width of each beam, okay? Now the width of each beam is 1.5 amos, okay? Its height is 10 amos, and then its thickness, how thick is the wall? If you would drill a hole right through the wall, how thick would that hole be? The answer is 1 amma, okay? Got it? So the wall is 1 amma thick, it's 1.5 amos wide, it's 10 amos tall, okay? Great. Now, we're assuming that if you're how many beams would be able to lie down, width-wise on this wagon? Well, the wagon was 5 amos long. Each beam is 1.5 amos. 1.5 times, 1.5 goes into 5 3 times, right? 1.5 times 3 is 4.5, right? So you can, if you would have 4 beams, it would already be 6. And that's more than 5, so that's not going to work. But 3 would work. Okay, fine, very good. So we're saying that if the length of the wagon was 5 amos long, and each beam is 1.5 amos wide, so you can fit 3 stacks of beams on this wagon, okay? And that would take up 4.5 out of 5 of the available amos of the length of the wagon, which means that there is 1/2 of an amma remaining to be spread out in between these 3 rows of beams, which essentially in between 3 rows of beams, of course, would be 2 spaces, right? And each one of those two spaces between the rows would be 1/4 of an amma. Now, of course, 1/4 of an amma, if an amma is 6 tfachim, 1/4 of that is how many? Who can tell me how many amos 1/4 of 6 tfachim would be? Well, if I'm not mistaken, that would be 1.5 tfachim. Okay? I don't know if I said how many amos, but it would be 1.5 tfachim, right? One amma is 6 tfachim. 1/4 of that would be 1.5 tfachim. Okay? Now, 1.5 tfachim is obviously less than 3 tfachim. And as long as it's less than 3 tfachim, we would say lavud on these stacks, and we would consider them all connected. So if we want to say that the area in between the stacks, Rav is considering to be a Rishus Harabim because there's no roof, well, there actually is, it would be, meaning if you're standing under the wagon, so the area between the stacks, you would be considered as if there's no roof above your head. That's not true, because these stacks only had 1.5 tfachim in between them, and therefore we would say lavud and consider all the stacks connected, and therefore the entire entire wagon would be considered covered. You guys got that? Good. So that's what the Gemara says, right? So again, Michdei, let's see. Orka de agala kama havoy chamish amin. Okay, how long is the wagon? 5 amos long. Pusya de keresh kama havoy. How long is the width of each? How wide is the width of each beam? Amsa ufalga, 1.5 amos. Kama mosiv. So how many of these beams can you fit in the 5 amos of the wagon? Tlasa, you can fit 3 of these beams. Pashale palga da amsa, which means that there is 1/2 of an amma that is being unused space on the wagon. Now, kishdile mar bene uvene kilavudami. Now, if you were to spread out this 1/2 an amma between, right, evenly among the 2 spaces between the 3 stacks of beams, well, all you have is 1.5 tfachim between the stacks, and it would be lavud, and basically all the 3 stacks would all be considered connected, and no matter where you are under the wagon, you will be considered as though there is a roof above your head. What did I want to say? I can't remember. Oh, that there were 48 krushim in the Mishkan. Okay, 20 on each of the long sides, plus another 8 on the western side. So there were 48 of these krushim, and there were 4 wagons, which means each wagon had 12 beams on it, which means that if we're assuming that there were 3 stacks, so there were 3 stacks of 4 beams each. Okay, fine. Misav, so now the Gemara says 1 second. Misavad krushim apusayu hava manachlu, achudan manachlu. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, 1 second. You're assuming, or we've been assuming until now, that the krushim, that the beams are laid down on the wagon width-wise, right? And therefore, we're assuming that each beam takes up 1.5 amos of space. But the Gemara suggests that actually maybe the beams were laid down on their thickness, right? We said that the thickness of the wall of the Mishkan was 1 amma. So maybe they actually didn't lie down the beams on their 1.5 amma width. Rather, they laid down the beams on the wagon on their 1 amma thickness, and that's how they were stacking them. Okay, okay, and we want to suggest that if we therefore stack these beams based on their 1 amma thickness as opposed to their 1.5 amma width, then perhaps there will be enough space so that you wouldn't say lavud, and there would be areas underneath the wagon that would not be covered. So the Gemara says, yeah, but sof, sumcha de keresh kama have amsa. But at the end of the day, how thick are these beams? They're 1 amma thick. Kama have mosiv arba. So how many of these 1 amma thick beams would they put on to the wagon that is 5 amas long? They would put 4. They wouldn't stack all 5 on, they would put 4. Pashala amsa, which means that there is remaining 1 amma to be spread apart between the 3 spaces between the 4 stacks. Okay? So we have 4 stacks of these beams that are being laid down on their 1 amma thickness, right? Those 4 stacks are going to collectively take up 4 amos of space out of the 5 amos of the length of the wagon, which means that there is 1 amma that we are dividing up between the 3 areas of space between the 4 stacks of beams. So 1 amma, which is 6 tfachim, divided by 3 is 2 tfachim. Once again, 2 tfachim is less than 3 tfachim, and we're still going to say lavud and consider it as though the wagon is completely covered by beams, and there is no area underneath the wagon that would not be considered covered. So kishdila mar bene uvene kilavudami. So therefore, when you equally space that remaining amma among the 3 areas between the stacks of beams, it will still be subject to principles of lavud, and the entire underneath of the wagon would be considered covered. So now the Gemara says something interesting. It says, "Hanicha leman da'amar kroshim milamatan ovyon amma milamailon kalim v'hochen ad ke'etzba shapir." Interesting. So the Gemara now actually mentions that there is an opinion, apparently it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that we're going to get to, that actually if you look at the diagram on the second column of 98A2, there's that other diagram where you see that there are these beams that are actually getting thinner and thinner as they go, right? So the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda actually was that the beams would, at their very bottom, they would have a thickness of 1 amma. However, it would be like a right triangle. And so you have these beams, and they're standing upright, and they're 10 amos tall. But the thickness, as the height of the beam goes upwards, its thickness is getting thinner and thinner until it's just like the size of a finger breadth at the top of the beam. Okay? So inside, if you were inside the Mishkan, you were looking at the beam, it would be completely flat. But from the outside, it would look as though the beam is getting smaller and smaller as it goes up. So now, if you were to imagine that, as we are describing on this wagon, that you are taking this beam and you are putting it on the wagon, on its thickness, well, its thickness is getting thinner and thinner as the beam goes up. And imagine, and we're saying that basically you would put the middle 5 tfachim amos, the middle 5 amos would basically be on the wagon. Then you would have the bottom 2.5 amos hanging off, let's say, the left of the wagon, and then the top 2.5 amos hanging off of the right side of the wagon. Well, if you think about it, if the beam starts at a thickness of 1 amma, so if you divide it in 4, that would, I guess, be 1/4 of an amma for, I guess it gets smaller and smaller by 1/4 of an amma, as you go up the quarter of the beam. Oh gosh, does that make any sense? But what I'm trying to say is that if you have 25% of the beam hanging off of the left side of the wagon, well, once you get to the wagon, it's already only 3/4 of an amma thick, right? And if we're saying that there were, 4 of these beams on the cart, well, if you think about it, by the time the beam gets to the cart, so there's 4 times basically 3/4 of an amma is only 3 amos, which means that you have 2 amos remaining. And if you divide 2 amos, which is 12 tfachim, and you divide those in 3 for the 3 spaces between the 4 beams, well, 12 divided by 3, if I'm not mistaken, is 4, and that's already more than the 3 tfachim of lavud. So we wouldn't say lavud anymore. Did I do the math right though? I may have screwed up the math. One second. Again, we have 4, so 1.5 amos. Again? Yeah, so 1.5 amos times 2 is 3 amos. Yeah, exactly. If it's 3 amos, so then there's 2 amos remaining, and 2 amos would be 12 tfachim, and divided by 3 would be 4. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Which means that you would have 4, I think I didn't screw up the math. But in any event, and that's of course only the thickest part of where it goes into the over the wagon. But then it keeps on getting thinner and thinner. So certainly, like by the other side of the wagon, you're gonna have plenty of space, Darton. So that's an interesting opinion, right? So basically, if you say like Rabbi Yehuda, well, then I can understand how there would be areas where you could, theoretically be hanging out underneath the wagon, and there can be areas that are not covered at all, and there's more than 3 tvachim of space in between the beams, and you could be hanging out in Rosh Hashanah even underneath the wagons. How cool is that? So says the Gemara, so I understand if you say, like Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda on the Amud Beis, but anyways, if you say like him, that the thickness at the bottom of the beam is 10 amos, no, is 1 amma, and it gets thinner and thinner as it goes up, well then I understand how there could be space underneath the wagon that is not covered, and we wouldn't say lavud. However, according to the Mandamur, says that actually the thickness of the beam remains the same throughout, and that means that at the bottom it's 1 amma, and at the top it's 1 amma. It's 1 amma entirely. Well, then we get to the same question as before, which is that if we have 4 of these beams, and each one is 1 amma, well then there's only going to be 2 tvachim in between each beam, and we're going to say lavud. How would it be possible for Rav to say that there will be areas underneath the wagon that would not be covered, and thus would be considered Rosh Hashanah? So Michael Meimar. So Rav Kahana says, Rav Kahana be'atba'e. Okay, fine. It's talking about atba'e. Atba'e are like paper clips, right? If you imagine, so the way that they used to make paper clips apparently is they would take some kind of like piece of wood or something, or like some kind of reed epis, and they would basically slit it from the bottom, like in the middle, from the bottom almost to the top. And because it was still connected at the top, it would kind of hold the 2 pieces together, and you would kind of slip some paper in there, and it would kind of keep the papers together. The point being that because they're connected at the top, it would keep the 2 halves of this wood together. And that is what we're borrowing for our analogy. That basically, instead of making the 4 stacks of beams equidistant, rather there would actually be 2 stacks, and each like right next to each other. So what you would have in this case actually is you would have 2 stacks of beams on their 1 amma thickness. So basically for a total of 2 amos. And that would be on one end of the wagon. And on the opposite end of the wagon, you would have the other 2 stacks of beams, which would be another 2 amos. And in the middle, you would have that remaining amma right in the middle. That amma, of course, is 6 tvachim. Therefore, there would not be any lavud between the 2 stacks. And you would have 1 amma between them. And it would not be considered covered at all. And in that space, it would be considered Rosh Hashanah. Okay. So, but 1 second, the Gemara says, but wait a second, where were these 2 stacks, or 4 stacks, but like 2 groups of 2 stacks? They were on top of the wagon, of course, right? But the wagon itself, wasn't that covered? Was it just like an open wagon? First of all, I thought the answer is yes, it was just an open wagon, meaning literally just like a frame, and they would put beams on the frame, right? But the Gemara, for whatever reason right now, wants to assume that it wasn't just a frame, it was covered. In which case, who cares that there's space between the 2 groups of stacks? At the end of the day, the wagon itself, was covered. So therefore, underneath the wagon is going to be covered. So the Gemara answers, Amr Shmuel b'Yiseidis. So Shmuel answers, no, it wasn't completely covered. There were like a few kind of pegs, kind of going across, but it certainly wasn't covered. And certainly the assumption is that in the area between these 2 groups of stacks, it wasn't covered at all, and that would be considered Rosh Hashanah. Okay, cool. How's everyone doing? You're doing great, right? Good. Friends, the very top line of Tzadi Ches Amud Beis. What does the puzzle say? Shir Hashirim? Dodit Sach. What is it? Dodit Sach ve. I don't know. Can't remember. But Sach means what? Like very Tzadi Ches, which is Daf Tzadi Ches. Means, doesn't it mean like very like clear and pure? Like this, like this Daf. It's very clear. Okay, fine. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Krushim milamatan ovyon amo milamailan kolin v'hochin ad ke'etzba shnemar. Okay, one second. So this is the opinion that we were just talking about, right? So that the beams at their very bottom were 1 amma thick. Okay. Umilamailan, and as they get up, kolin v'hochin, they get smaller and smaller ad ke'etzba until at the very top it's literally just the thickness of a finger. Shnemar, the pasuk says, "You samim al rosho." It says by the krushim, it says you tamim al rosho. And there's different ways to understand that, as we're going to see. But one way to understand them is to mean tamim, that they're going to be like, like killed, destroyed, or like no more. Keilu. Ulahalanu Omer, it says by Yoshua, tamu nichrasu. It says that when they crossed the Yarden, that the water just stopped, and on one side of the Yidden, the water was just piling up, and on the other side, it just went dry. Like it just, tamu nichrasu, it got like desolate. Like there was just no more water over there. So here also, we're assuming that keilu, you samim milamala, that they should be keilu non-existent at the top, i.e. goes down to the size of simply a finger. Div Rabbi Yehuda, that is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay, so it starts at the bottom with the thickness of an amma, and as it goes up, it gets thinner and thinner until it's just the size of a finger. Rabbi Nechemia Omer says a very holy Rabbi Nechemia, Kishem shemilam. Kishem shemilamatan ovyan amma, just like at the bottom the thickness is 1 amma, kach milamailon ovyan amma. Well, guess what? Also, the thickness at the top of the beam is 1 amma thick, i.e., it remains consistent throughout. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, yachdav, right? The pasuk says, v'yachdav yusamim arosho, that together it should be, they should be at their top, and therefore he wants to say that yachdav means it's uniform, i.e. it's a amma thickness throughout the entire beam. V'yaksiv samim, what does Rabbi Nechemia do with Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk of tamim, which Rabbi Yehuda wants to understand as being like sort of non-existent at the top? Hahu delesu shleimin v'lo lesu denisra. No, tamim means, tam also means complete, whole. So Rabbi Nechemia learns that to mean that you should use whole pieces of wood and don't like combine pieces of wood into beams. You should use, whole, unobstructed pieces of wood. Ve'idach, nami ksiv, haksiv yachdav. What does Rabbi Yehuda do with the pasuk which says yachdav, which Rabbi Nechemia learns to mean uniform, right? 1 amma throughout. So ahudlo lishal chofinu me hadade. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda says that no, what that means yachdav means that they should be, flush against each other. Keilu shouldn't have one wall sticking out, one wall kind of inside. No, they should all be flat and smooth. One right next to each other, one right next to the other at the same kind of, none of them should be sticking out. They should all be flush. Okay? The Gemara says, Bishlam l'manda amrik shem shemilmatan ovyan amma, kach milmalan ovyan amma. Hanun dichsev uliyachse amishkan yama taise shisha krushim ushne krushim taisha taiselim kzoos dasi pusya dehane mimalile lesumcha dehane. Okay, I'm just going to keep on reading for a minute. Elmadam milmatan ovyan amma milmalan kalam v'ochen ad ke'etzba hai ayel v'hai nafig deshafilu kitarin. Wow. How about this? The best way I think to understand this is probably going to be to look at another diagram. So, again, looking at the art scroll. So if you look on 98B1, okay, the page that's not page 98B1. So if you look on the right side at the bottom, the diagram. So, okay, wow. How do I explain this? Wow. Okay. So, all right. So like this. All right. The inside of the Mishkan was 10 amos wide, okay? There was 10 amos of space inside the Mishkan. Great. Now, there were the length of the Mishkan was comprised of 20 beams that each one was 1.5 amos wide, right? So now 20 times 1.5 is 30, which means that the length of the Mishkan was 30 amos long, and we're saying that the width of the Mishkan was 10 amos wide. Okay, fine. Now remember, each one of these beams, while it was 1.5 amos wide, it was 1 amma thick. Okay, great. So now you have these two walls, and these two walls are 20 of these beams. Okay, and each of the beams is 1 amma thick. Fine. Now, how do you construct the perpendicular wall, right? Which in our case is going to be the western wall, right? That you enter into the Mishkan from the east, but the back of the Mishkan is going to be the western wall, okay? So how do you construct that western wall? Do you kind of put it in between the two, the north and the south walls? Or maybe do you put it outside? If you put it outside, then you're going to have to, I don't know, imagine like, oh gosh, how do I even do this? Like imagine, look, if you're watching the video so you can kind of see my diagram that I'm trying to make with like my fingers. So there's two ways that you can kind of like put this third wall. Either one would be like on top like that, in which case it would have to kind of go cover sort of both walls, right? Completely cover it. The other way is to put it inside, in which case it goes in between. So the way that they did it, I don't know if, hopefully that makes sense, but the way that they did it in the Mishkan is they would do it like to cover both walls, so like on the outside of both walls. So like the north and south walls would end, and at that point the western wall would begin, and it would be completely in addition to the north and southern walls. And the point is, so now let's say you would take, so the way that the western wall was constructed was you would take 6 beams and you put them in the middle. Now 6 beams, now each beam has a width of 1.5 amos, so that only gets us to 9 amos. Now we're going to have a remaining half an amma on either side of these beams. Well, not to worry. So remember, if you would take an additional beam, which is 1.5 amos, well then that's perfect, because half of the amma will cover the remaining half an amma, let's say on the right side of these beams. So, and then the remaining amma is just going to be to cover the thickness of the, let's say what would that be? The north wall, right? Right? Because the north wall is the thickness of an amma. So then you take this beam that has a width of 1.5 ammas, and it's going to take 1 amma from that beam to cover the width of the northern wall. Then you have a remaining half an amma, which is going to cover the half an amma of space in the inside of the Mishkan. And then you have the same thing on the southern wall, right? So you're going to have another beam that's 1.5 ammas wide, and half of it is going to cover the remaining space in the Mishkan, and then the other amma is going to be to cover the thickness of the southern wall. I hope that this all makes sense. And you can kind of see that in that diagram on 98b1 on the right side, right? So what you kind of see is, so you see, oh gosh, I don't even know I don't even know how to explain what you see. Like you see those two, like the north and south walls, and then you kind of see how the western wall, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exactly. So you have 8 of those beams, and they kind of make up the western wall, okay? 6 of those beams are going to create 9 amos, because 6 times 1.5 is 9. Then each beam in the corner, which each beam is going to be 1.5 ammas. So 1 amma from each of those beams is going to be to cover the north and south walls respectively, but the remaining half an amma is going to be to cover the space in the Mishkan on either side of those 6 middle beams that have a half an amma on either side. I hope this makes sense. I'm trying my best. So great. So that is, so if you say, like Rabbi Nehemiah, that the thickness of the walls was uniform, well then what we said just makes sense, right? The walls are kind of flush against each other and everything adds up. However, if you look at the next diagram on page 98b1, so you see how they're kind of like messed up, because if like Rabbi Yehuda, the walls get thinner as you go up, so what's going to happen is, like, they start at 1 amma thick, but as they go up, they get really thin. And what's going to happen is that on that western wall, so you're going to have the corner, beams that basically at their bottom, well, basically the width doesn't change, meaning the thickness changes, right? Meaning it starts at 1 amma thick and gets thinner and thinner, but the width of the beams remain the same at 1.5 ammas. So what's going to happen is there's going to be like extra wall, right? Because what's going to happen is let's say north and southern walls respectively, their thickness is getting thinner and thinner and thinner, but the width of the beams on the western wall, their 1.5 amma width, that never changes, and therefore that's going to go straight up the width, even though their thickness is getting thinner, but their width remains the same, and you're going to have like extra wall from the western wall that's just like not flush, that's hanging out extra from the north and southern walls, respectively. Oh gosh, I hope I'm making sense. But in any event, what do you do about that? Oh gosh. So the Gemara says, Bishlam lemanda Amar kishem shemilimatan ovion ama kach milimaylan ovion ama. So I understand according to Rabbi Nechemia, who says that just like at the bottom the thickness is an amma, also at the top the thickness is an amma. Well, hanu dichsev v'liachse mishkan yama. That's what it says. Well, on the western wall of the Mishkan, taisa shisha krashim. You should make 6 of these beams. Ushne krashim taisa lemikzuos, or lemikutzuos, I think. The mikutzos, and then and make 2 additional beams for the corners. The asi pusya dahane, that the width of these 2 corner beams, or the 2 extreme beams on the western wall, mimalile lesumcha dahane, and they will cover the thickness of the northern and southern walls, respectively. However, according to Mando Amr, who says that at the bottom their thickness is 1 amma, but as they get up they get thinner, so then well, then this one is going to be going in, and this one is going to be going out, right? Meaning the northern and southern walls, respectively, are going to be getting thinner as they go up, yet the western wall is going to be sticking out because of their thickness on the corner ones. So the Gemara answers the shafidu kitorin. So the Gemara answers, no, well, what they do is they just kind of shave down the sides so that they're flush. Simple as that. Okay, now the Gemara says, well, the Gemara really quotes a pasuk that says, V'abriach hatichon b'socha krashim. Okay, let's see, how should we do this? Okay, I guess that holy shnikes. Okay, basically, each beam, holy shnikes. Okay, so each beam had like a pole going through it, right? Because remember how we said that like we want to make sure that all of the beams are flush? So what would happen is each beam in the Mishkan, so it would have these like tubing on the outside of it, right? These pipes on the outside, and one I believe at 25% of the way down, and then another at 75% of the way down. Okay, and these pipes, what they would do is they'd actually take 4 beams, okay, and you'd basically stick them in these pipes from either end of the. Gosh, how am I supposed to explain this? I mean, you can kind of see it in that diagram, I guess, on the Gemara. Yeah, you can definitely see it to some extent, right? So basically, I get to some extent, meaning, but you have 20 of these beams right next to each other, and they have, so 25% of the way down from the top and 25% of the way up from the bottom, there would be this like piping on the outside of the beams, and you would stick poles through that piping to make sure that they didn't move. Now, there were actually 4 poles, right? One would go 50% of the way from the right to the left, and then the other one would go 50% of the way from the left to the right, and they would meet in the middle, and that was for the top layers of tubing and the bottom layers of tubing. Now, in the middle, there was actually this pole that went straight across, there was one pole that went straight across the middle, it was actually went straight through. This wasn't in pipes on the outside. This mamish went straight through the beams. And you would have a pole that goes all the way through the side. Now the Gemara says that there was taka a miracle over here. It was actually a miracle. You would have this like strong pipe. I don't remember if it was made out of gold. I can't remember. But you'd have this pipe that would go and it was like a mamish, a metal pipe, and you would stick it in on one end of, let's say, the southern wall, and you would stick it in, and it would somehow wrap around the western wall and then wrap around again the northern wall, until it would be, you wrap all the way around. So it was a miracle because usually, strong metal like that wouldn't bend. And here it just kind of bent once it got to the corners. Okay? Fine. Now we start getting into the coverings of the Mishkan. Okay? We've referenced these coverings a few times. Right? There was that first layer of the Sheish Moshzar Utcheles Ve'agaman V'tolas Shani. Right, so it was this layer that was woven threads of 1 thread of linen and then 3 types of threads of wool. So that was the first layer, and then the second layer of covering on the Mishkan was made out of goat hair. We are going to now discuss these layers. Okay, so now Mishkan Taisa Eser Urias. Okay, so you got to make. It refers to the Mishkan as the lower level of covering that you would, I guess, see when you're inside the Mishkan. So the lower level of the first level of covering was made of 10 of these panels, but really like 10 strips of woven wool. Okay. Now the length of each of these 10 strips of woven wool was 28 amas long. And its width was 4 amas wide. Okay, so basically if you have 10 of these strips, and each one of them is 4 amas wide, so you have 40 amas of a length of these strips together. And or I guess the width, however you want to say it, but basically like the longer side of each one of these strips was 28 amos long, and its width was 4 amos for each one. So again, so Mishkan Taisa Eser Urias, so this first layer of covering you're going to make out of 10 of these strips. Now the length of each one of these strips was 28 amos long. Shdi Orchayu Lefusya de Mishkan. Now, if you spread over the length of each strip over the width of the Mishkan Kamahavya, how much is it? Well, okay. So remember, as we said a few minutes ago, the width of the Mishkan was 10 amos wide, right? The space inside the Mishkan was 10 amos wide, okay? So now you have this strip that's 28 amos long, and you're spreading that out equally over the Mishkan and draped over the sides, okay? So Eser Vitmani, so it starts out with 28 amos. Dal Eser Le'igra, so now you have to subtract from the 28 10 of the amos of the length that are going to be serving as a roof for the inside of the Mishkan. Pasha Luhu Tes Lahagisa V'Tes Lahagisa. So now what you have left is you have 9 amos left for each side of the Mishkan. That would be the north and the southern sides respectively. So the Rabbi Yehuda, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the top of each beam is essentially a point, well then it just immediately starts draping down. Migalia Amad Adanim. Great. So, okay, here's another thing. Basically, the krashim, so how do you keep them sturdy in the ground? So there would be these like adanim, these braces. Basically, there would be, oh gosh, how do you even describe the adanim? I think we might get to them, we're going to get to it tomorrow, but let's just say for now this, that the first amma of the 10 amma height of the beams of the Mishkan were covered in these silver braces. Okay, these silver braces. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, immediately once the 10 amos of these strips of woolen covering, well, not necessarily wool, but of woven covering, so 10 amos of the 28 amos are used for covering the inside of the Mishkan. Now, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the walls come up to a point, so immediately once this covering the strip has covered the inside of the Mishkan, you can immediately drape the remaining 9 amos of each side down the sides of the Mishkan. And being that the height of the krashim was 10 amos tall, so if they drape over 9 amos, basically the bottom amma of the beam is going to be exposed, and that is the bottom amma where the adanim are, where these braces are. Okay, so and that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, right? So the Rabbi Yehuda migaya amma da adanim. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, so you drape over these sides, and they go 9 amos down, and the 1 amma, the final amma of the beam, which is where the adanim are exposed. Now, according to Rabbi Nechemia, however, in addition to the 1 amma of the adanim, there's also the 1 amma of beam that is exposed, because of course, according to Rabbi Nechemia, the thickness of the walls are 1 amma. So therefore, once the strip of woven covering has covered the width of the Mishkan, well, it also needs to cover the width of the walls, right? Which is 1 amma on each side. So you have to remove an additional 2 amos, and therefore, so it's 28 minus 10, which is 18, minus 2, which is 16, divided by 2, right? So is 8. So you have 8 hanging down this side, 8 hanging down that side, which means that there is an additional, right? That there are 2 amos at the bottom of the beam that are exposed, 1 amma for the adanim, 1 amma for the krashim. Okay. Right, so the Rabbi Nechemia Migalia Amma de Krashim. So according to Rabbi Nechemia, there is one Amma of the Krashim in addition to the one Amma of Adanim. It says Shdi Pusayu Leorka de Mishkan Kamya. Oh, okay, fine. Did I just skip? No. Migalia de Adanim. Yeah, that's good. Next. Now the Gemara says, now, Shdi Pusayu Leorka de Mishkan. Now, if you take these strips, right? So we said that these strips of the first layer of covering for the Mishkan were 28 amos long. And we showed how you take that and you spread it over the width of the Mishkan. Now, what do? Now we have 10 of these strips. Each of these 10 strips was 4 amos wide, and there were 10 of them, which means that the total sort of width of this of all these strips together is 40 amos, and this is going to be to cover the length of the Mishkan. Now, of course, the Mishkan was 30 amos long. Okay, so we see now Shdi Pusayu Leorka de Mishkan. So now take the width of all of these 10 strips combined. So Kama Havya I buy. Okay, so we started with a total of 40 amos for the 10 strips that are each 4 amos wide. Dal tlasin leigra. Now 30 of those amos are going to be to cover the roof, to be used as a roof for the Mishkan, to cover the length of the 30 amos of the Mishkan. Pashalu yud, and you have remaining 10 amos of these strips. So the Rabbi Yehuda Michasya Amma da Adanim. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says, well, the beams go up to a point at the top, so the remaining 10 amos can mamish just immediately go down to cover the 10 amos height of the beams. Okay, which means it will cover the entire beam of the western side of the Mishkan, right, including the Adanim. Rabbi Nechemia Migalia Amma da Adanim, whereas according to Rabbi Nechemia, the back wall of the Mishkan has a thickness of an Amma, which means that, so one of the remaining 10 amos is going to be used to cover the thickness of the back wall of the Mishkan. And then you have the remaining 9 amos to cover the height of the beams of the western wall down until the bottom amma, which is the Adanim, and the Adanim would be exposed on the western wall. Holy shnikes. Okay, good. You guys got that? Great. Weiter. Vasisa Rias Izim La'oil V'gomer. No. Now, there's an additional layer of covering of the Mishkan. Okay? And that was the second covering, which was made out of goat hair. Now, there are two differences between when it comes to this covering. One is that the length of it was not 28 amos, it was 30 amos. And the second difference is that instead of 10 panels, there were 11 panels. So there were still 4 amos width for each one, but there were 11 of them. Okay? So now, orech hayriah ha'achas shloshim ba'am v'gomer. So each of these strips had a length of 30. Now, shti orchayu lefusi de mishkan. So it extend its length over the width of the Mishkan. Hava kama havya tlasin. So how long is each one of these strips? 30 amos long. Dal eser leigra. Now 10 of these amos are going to be for the roof over the Mishkan. Pashalu eser. Okay, so now you have remaining 10 amos on either side of the Mishkan to be used to drape over the sides of the Mishkan. So the Rabbi Yehuda Michasya Amma da Adanim. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Imamish covers the entire height of the 10 amos of the beams, and the entire beam is covered, including the Adanim are covered. The Rabbi Nechemia Migalia Amma da Adanim. Whereas according to Rabbi Nechemia, you're going to have 1 amma thickness for each of the beams on either side of the width of the Mishkan. So you have the 10 amos of the width of the Mishkan plus an additional 2 amos for covering the beams. So 30 minus 12 is 18, which means that if you divide that in 2, you have 9 additional amos to cover the northern and southern sides respectively, and the Adanim would be exposed. Okay. We also learn in a brayso like this, right? Be'odef l'chasos ama shel adanim divrei Yehuda. Right. So when it says exactly, so we say that the goat hair covering of the Mishkan was 30 amos as opposed to the 28 amos of the first woven layer of the Mishkan. So that means that on either side of the Mishkan there you have an additional amma to play with, right? So it says l'chasos amma shel adanim divrei Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, that additional amma, i.e., he has 10 amos to drape on either side. So that is going to be to cover the adanim, meaning it's going to completely cover the beam, including the adanim. Rabbi Nechemia Omer l'chasos amma shel krashim, whereas Rabbi Nechemia says that additional amma of length on either side is going to cover the amma of beam that was exposed from the first covering of the Mishkan. Okay. Now, shdi pusayu leorche the Mishkan. Now, in terms of so now you have these 11 strips of goat hair strips. So each one was 4 amas wide. So 11 times 4 is 44. Okay. Shti pusai leorche the Mishkan kama havya mem ve'arba, 44. So dal plusin le'agra. So now 30 of those 44 are going to be used to cover the length of the Mishkan. Okay. Pashalu arbasre. So now you have 14 left. Okay. Dal tarte lechafla. Now, 2 amos were used to cover, basically to fold over the front of the Mishkan. The front of the Mishkan was the eastern side of the Mishkan. So half of one strip, i.e. 2 amos, was folded over the front, was draped down over the front of the Mishkan. Dirsiv, as the passage says, that the 6th Yiriyah, the 6th one of these strips, should be folded down, draped over the eastern side of the Mishkan. Pasha lehu tarte srei, and you have 12 amos left, and with those 12 amos, so you'll drape it over the back of the Mishkan, which depending how you learn according to Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Nechemia, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it will immediately go down to cover the 10 amos of the back wall, plus 2 amos that are just kind of like, draped on the floor. And according to Rabbi Nechemia, there will be 1 amma thickness in the back, plus 9, and then it will go down and cover the 10 amos of the back wall, plus an additional amma on the floor. So Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda, I understand according to Rabbi Yehuda, Hani Dichsev Chatzi Ariya Udefes Tisrach, that now the additional remaining strip of goat hair, you should just kind of like spread out on the floor. So Rabbi Nechemia, my tisrach, what does it mean that you're going to be spreading out those 2 amos on the floor? So tisrach mechav roseh. No, it means that it should be spread out and extend from the first layer. I mean, the first layer ended with an additional amma exposed at the bottom. So this one will sort of extend past that additional one, plus sort of be spread out 1 amma on the floor, on the back by the western side. Tanat Rabbi Yishmael was taught in Besmedrash Rabbi Yishmael, Lama Mishkan Dome, Leisha Shemalechas B'Shuk Ushvuleh Malchan Achrel. What is the Mishkan similar to? It is similar to like a woman who's walking in the market and like her dress is kind of like trailing behind her, right? Almost like a bridal dress or something. So that's like the Mishkan also. The covering of the Mishkan was kind of like draped behind it. And actually you can kind of see these definitions also on diagrams on 98b2 with the coverings of the Mishkan and how they draped over the sides. So anyways, friends, kol kavod, hope you enjoyed that. Let's maybe do a review over here. So we started off with throwing from one Rishus HaRabim to another Rishus HaRabim with the Rishus HaYachid in the middle, and we say that if in total, this object traveled 4 amos in Rishus HaRabim, Keilu, even if it's divided between the 2 Rishus HaRabims, but let's say 2 in this Rishus HaRabim and 2 in the other Rishus HaRabim, so it can be chayiv because we say Rishus Mitztarfos, the 2 Rishus HaRabims can join together. But if it's less than 4 amos combined in the Rishus HaRabims, so then you're going to be pater because we do not say Kluta Kamo She'unacha Damya. Then we talked about the space between the beams and the wagons. So first we wanted to say that you lie down the beams on its width that are 1.5 amos wide. So you could fit 3 of those, which means that in between each of the 3 stacks, there would be 1.5 tefachim, but we would say lavud, and we're trying to find areas that would not be covered at all. So we said, okay, maybe you put it by the thickness. The thickness was 1 amma. But still, there would only be 2 tefachim between each stack. So then it would still be lavud. So then what we wanted to say was that, well, first of all, what we said was that according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, where it gets thinner as it goes up, well, then actually you can say how there was space between the beams. And we said, but even according to Rabbi Nechemia, who says that the thickness of the beams is consistent throughout, still you could say that you had basically 2 rows right next to each other, and there was 1 amma of space in the middle, and that was what the open space was. And then, of course, in terms of the thickness of the beam, so Rabbi Yehuda says that they get narrower as they go up. Rabbi Nechemia says that it's consistent height throughout. We then talked about the coverings of the Mishkan. So the first covering was 28 amos long, 4 amos wide, and there were 10 of them. So now on the sides of the Mishkan, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the beams of the Mishkan came to a point, so then you would basically have on the first layer just the adanim would be exposed, i.e. 1 amma on either side. According to Rabbi Nechemia, there would be the adanim and also 1 amma of the beam itself would be exposed. In the back, the first layer would completely cover the beams according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Nechemia, the adanim would be exposed in the back. And in terms of the goat covering, so the length was 30 amos, the width was 4 amos, and there were 11 of them. On the sides, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be completely covered, and according to Rabbi Nechemia, just the adanim would be exposed. On the back, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there would be 2 amos sort of draped behind it. According to Rabbi Nechemia, there would be 1 amma. And then they said in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yehuda, that's what it means, that the Mishkan was like a woman walking in the shuk, in the market, with her dress, trailing behind her. So too, the Mishkan had the coverings trailing behind it. Cool, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Enjoy your day. Peace.